So Andre, if you could throw the slides back up, that'd be awesome. So I really appreciate what Syra was saying, because she's letting us know that, and this is also why I'm spending so much time on the history of restorative practices. I know probably people out there are like, when are we getting to the meat? But like, this is the reason why it's very important to lay the foundation of why we even have access to this information in the first place. And really what happened was, like, during the 90s, not just in the United States, but also in Canada, members of the First Nations in Canada began teaching circle practice to non-Indigenous people to seek alternatives to mass incarceration that was going on for indigenous folks up there. But they needed a way to do that. In order to do that, they had to get in contact with lawyers and judges and prosecutors and other non-Indigenous neighbors. So this is really where it started trickling down into the non-Indigenous population. So people like, if you're familiar with Kay Pranis, or who are these other people? Some of these, Howard Zare, some of the people who others might consider the grandfather of restorative practices, but it's not necessarily the case. It's just that it's them who ushered it into modernity, I would say. So, all right, let's take it to the next slide. And we're going to do an exercise really quickly. So if I'm going to time us for 30 seconds, let me get my little timer out here. Okay, so when I say go, we are going to just like clench a fist for 30 seconds. And just the object is to pay attention to all the sensations that you're feeling in your body. Tension, tightness, heat, maybe noting some thoughts that you're thinking at the time. And we're just going to do this for 30 seconds. So on your mark, get set, go. Tight, tight, tight. Okay, stop. And you can release it, shake it out if you need to. Does anybody want to explain what their experience was like with that? Anybody, feeling anything? You want to describe your sensations?
I was hurting myself.
Yeah, you were hurting yourself. Could you feel it? Oh, we got
Down my arm, through my wrist, and in my hands. Yeah.
In your arm, in your wrist, and in your hands. Yeah. And Seema saying that they felt a sensation of heat. Suman is saying they felt a lot of discomfort. Yeah. And so for my own self, I sort of felt something similar to Mary, where it wasn't just in this space where the main thing was going on, but I definitely felt it like going up my forearm, in my elbow, going up my shoulder. And so really what I was trying to get at was that physically we were limiting our flow of blood, we were limiting our range of motion. And like I said, for my own self, there was like a creeping all the way up, and it wasn't just that the first the initial site, but it was extending out and impacting other parts of my own side of my body. So The idea really being that when we are in conflict, it's not just the original source that gets impacted, it's other places that we might not have expected. It's other sensations that we did not expect. It's other, yeah, everything became focused on that. Exactly. So like when saying that this clenched fist was the conflict, right? The conflict was doing the restricting, the conflict was doing the limiting, and then we become all encompassed, our focus becomes all encompassed on this one thing, and we can't really focus on anything else. So
Yeah, Wind, I was gonna interrupt you for like 1 second, if
yeah,
that's okay.
totally.
So, like you asked about the right hand. I did the right hand, but I am like left-handed when I play my viola. And I got like that was like the main thing that I thought of when I was like struck. And you like you have to go back and forth with things, and just like finger dexterity and movability, and like I don't know if that's a word, but
It
anyway,
is
I really
now.
appreciate everything you're saying, but like yeah, no, like just like it was my left hand I was thinking of when I was working with my right hand, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So I don't know if that's helpful. I hope it is.
Yeah, wait, so that was really interesting. Like the sensations you were having were in your right hand, but you were thinking about your left hand?
You like initially like the thing was like right hand, and but I'm left-handed when it comes to
Mm,
my
mm-hmm,
viola, so I can like kind of
mm-hmm.
do what I need to do. But when I was like focusing on like what I needed to do and like keep everything closed off, I was thinking like, oh God, so yeah, it's not easy, like whatever it is, like
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And really also the point of that exercise was that in restorative practices, we're really looking to keep the flow going. So when you have a conflict, and that isn't getting addressed for whatever reason, it's creating a stoppage and preventing a flow from happening. So the idea behind restorative practices is to keep the flow going between you and the community, between you and your relationships, your families, and really also a relationship that doesn't get talked about enough, I feel like, is the first relationship that we have, which is with ourselves. So if we can go to the next slide, please. One of the ways to contextualize what restorative practices is to kind of compare it to what the punitive reaction has always been. So we're looking at these two ways of responding to harm. And the punitive way, the first question is what law was broken? And with a restorative lens, you would say, what happened? In a punitive way, you would say, who is to blame? And in a restorative lens, you would say, who was impacted and how? In a punitive lens, you would say, what punishment does that person now deserve? And in a restorative lens, you would say, what needs must be addressed to make things right? And so if we look at the punitive questions, this punitive line of questioning really is focusing in on the law and the state, and like how we transgressed against the state. And when we look at restorative practices, it's really more focused around relationships and people, and how it's more individualized in a way, in terms of like you have done something that caused harm to another being. So this makes it more individualized, as opposed to like you broke the law and you transgressed against a whole state or the whole law book. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Another way of looking at this dichotomy between punitive and restorative is also looking at the language. So in the punitive side, we have victim offender, or victim and perpetrator. And on the restorative side, you have, you know, the person who was harmed and the person who caused harm. On the punitive side, you have crime and punishment, and on the restorative side, you have harm and repair. So although when you say, you know, person who was harmed and person who caused harms, and it's kind of like a mouthful, but it really does humanize the people who are involved. And yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say about that. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. So this is another juxtaposition here. We're looking at motivation. So punitive motivation is fear-based and control-based. And restorative-based is relationship-based. So if you think about, let's say like running a red light. So fear-based would make your actions like, I'm not doing that because I don't want to get punished, or I don't want to get caught. But they're like afraid of the consequence of their actions. But a restorative decision-making really looks towards the relationship of the community, or a relationship who you're involved with at the time. So if you're running a red light, you don't do that because you're concerned about the welfare of the community. You want folks in the community to know that they are safe with you in it. You're making decisions that are thoughtful about others. So let me just check on time here. You know, I think we might even skip the breakout group. Y'all are so lucky. Okay. Okay, so let's skip to the next slide. Okay, so there's a lot of information right here. So this is kind of where I wanted to spend my time. I know my other slides have been short on words, which I appreciated. I wonder if you did too. So this one has a lot of information. So we're going to sit with this one for a minute. So this graphic is also from Amplify RJ. I told you I really appreciate their work. And they depicted the system and the philosophy of restorative justice as a tree. And I found that to be really, really, it's not just nice, it's like more than nice. It's helpful to see the relationship between all of these different areas in which holistically make up restorative justice. So when we think of restorative justice, we oftentimes think of the process, like circle process, and specifically we think of the responsive circle of like responding to harm. But let's start, I'm going to start with the roots. So in the roots, we're really looking at two things here. We're looking at the mindset and the values. So restorative mindset and restorative values. So there are 7 core assumptions that go into this, and the assumptions were derived from like indigenous teachings and other wisdom traditions by Kay Pranis and Carolyn Boyes Watson. So the first one says, the true self in everyone is good, wise, and powerful. The second core assumption is that the world is profoundly interconnected. The third one is that all human beings have a deep desire to be in good relationship. The fourth one is that all humans have gifts and everyone is needed for what they bring. The fifth one says everything we need to make positive change is already here. The sixth one says human beings are holistic. And the seventh says we need practices to build habits of living from the core self. So, yeah, so, and then in addition to this restorative mindset, it's paired with these values at the root. So the values you can see are interconnection, indigenous roots, equity, respect, compassion, and self-determination. So these beliefs or these values are really important and integral to anything else that may come out of this. So the trunk, the branches, the leaves, and the fruit are all reliant upon a strong value set and restorative mindset. And say you didn't believe that this had indigenous roots, that would be, then it would be kind of easier for cultural appropriation to happen, because you are just, maybe using things without understanding the sacredness of the ritual in a way that's like very meaningful or very deep. And I think equity is very important to mention as well here, because I feel like compassion and respect are self-explanatory. Equity is very crucial in this moment. We're having a lot of conversations, like personally, nationally, internationally, about what equity is. There's a lot of spaces where people are getting oppressed for their sex, their gender, their age, their whatever, sexual preference. And then interconnecting a lot of those things is race. So racial equity is like 100% at the core of restorative justice. And then I also like to mention self-determination, because, all these, how do you say it? Like, self-determination is really important because it's really at the root or connected to this indigenous roots portion. So before there was colonization, right? All these indigenous folks were living and doing circle practices to govern their own self. It was self-governance for them. And so once colonization happened and there was a large genocide and a push for indigenous people to assimilate to a more separatist life, we became more reliant upon the state and judges and something from on high to like dictate to us what was good for us in response to a harm. But self-determination, why it's so important, is because we know we don't need to rely on the courts to make those decisions for us. We know what's best for us. And so for me, I think that's a really important value that comes out of this. But you can also put in some of your other values as well, and these aren't exclusive. So moving on up the trunk, we have proactive. We have proactive restorative practice, which is like internal work, self-care, collaborative agreements, checking in, social and emotional learning, trauma-informed communication for connection, and talking circles. So there's a lot here too. There's a lot going on here too, but I think it's really important to start at that internal work for a proactive restorative practice. So in the same way that, well, I'll just say this, that internal work, you can't, I said internal work and self-care, you can't give to anybody else if you are running on empty. You can't, you have to fill your own cup, right? So thinking about doing that, doing those learnings, doing that, taking care of yourself, knowing when you need to take a break, when you can, put your foot on the gas and go and learn something. That's like really important to be able to then give. If you'll have been hangry, right? If when you're hangry and you're like trying to talk thoughtfully or with care to somebody else, it's like, it's very difficult. So that's the same idea here. So yeah, totally. So collaborative agreements is, when you're in circle and you're trying to set an expectation for how things are going to go, you're trying to get everybody on the same page about what people are going to expect of other people's behaviors and other people's relationship in that moment. Checking in is also really important, like we did at the beginning of this session, right? Like I wanted to check in with all of you because I care about you, and because I wanted to know if somebody was cloudy with a chance of meatballs. Like I'm like gonna be worried about what they're gonna ask, right? So glad to have all those sunshiny faces. But yeah, learning, like social and emotional learning, or trauma-informed communication for connection. So, I mean, we don't all necessarily have to be trauma-informed, but I mean, I think it would really be beneficial if we knew how to talk with each other or had that understanding of like what that means, especially in circle when we're like looking at other people who have had a lot of different experiences than we have. So that, I think it is an important piece. I think I should say that it is an important piece of learning. And especially if you're going to be a facilitator, you're going to want to know, differences about gender and physical ability, mental ability, and like, power dynamics. Like those are all really important for your own internal work and knowing how to interact and engage with other people in a way that's caring. So I'm just going to kind of skip because I know we're running low on time, but the branches are these responsive restorative circles. So the conversations, it could be 2 people, the circles could be 3 or more, conference, and that could be some, dealing with the community. And conferences are more dealing around a certain issue that came up, or specifically a conflict that came up. So these are more like the responsive, as opposed to the proactive. That's the branches. And then the fruits and leaves are the restorative outcomes. So with the healthy values, with the healthy restorative mindset, with the proactive work going into it, with the harm circles, going into harm circles and being able to respond with care in those times when harm has popped up, then you get these fruits and leaves, and that's the restorative outcome. You're talking about healing between you and the communities, relationships building between you and the communities, and accountability. And everybody kind of has different ideas about what accountability means, but yeah, so I think that accountability, especially, we're looking at not just apologies and not just, it's just that the harm is accounted or acknowledged. Maybe some behaviors have changed. And if there isn't a skill, maybe there's, opportunity for a skill to be built in that time. So all of this, I know it's a lot of information. All of this is the idea behind restorative justice, for the flow to be, going from the roots to the fruits and the leaves. And that is restorative justice. So basically, you know, this is really all boiling down to, you know, what kind of world we want to be living in. And, you know, we can help ourselves and we can help each other and our young people in our lives learn the ways of deep connection. And as my good friend Miriam Cabo says, and actually she's not really my good friend, but I'm just trying to speak that into being. But Miriam Caba, she's an extraordinary organizer and educator who advocates for the abolition of the prison industrial complex. She says hope is a discipline. So, and if we can go to the next slide, please, Andre. Oh, and the next slide too. Yeah, so, you know, if we're going to be hopeful about our future, then we have to keep continuing to work on the skills of care and interconnectivity and compassion and equity and respect and all the other things that we talked about today in our daily lives with our loved ones and with our communities, and especially in our relationship with ourselves. So that is restorative justice. Thank you. And maybe hit that next slide too. Yeah. Cool. And now we have some time if anybody has any questions. All right.
Hey, Wynn,
Yeah.
can you hear me? It's Sylvia. Can you, I don't know if you can see me. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
That's
great. Listen, first of all, amazing. This was so, you put so much in such a short time. I am truly impressed with all you presented. So thank you for that. And I just want to say, you know, as someone who comes out of an experience with the medical field for the past, 30 years of my life, I am really struck by these things you wrote, the punitive versus restorative, and how incredibly they apply to medicine as well. When you say, what law was broken, what is broken in this patient versus what happened to this person. It is just amazing how you go down those questions and you begin to see how the healthcare system can, without meaning to sometimes, really victimize and hurt people that it's trying to help at the same time, because they have that same kind of rigidity about who's to blame, what's the solution, instead of looking at it from this really holistic and healing lens. So I am just amazed at the parallels between them. So thank you for that.
That's really a great point, because you can see the structure of the rigidity and these within so many different systems, and that's intentional. That's comes from the roots of how this country was founded. So that's really interesting that you're recognizing that. It's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for showing up and sharing the space. This is really cool. It's cool to see everybody. Let's see. Seema says, I love your description of the art by Leah Marie Dorian. Thank you. Yeah, so if anybody needs to reach out or you all know how to connect with us, yeah.
I found the session to be nurturing and therapeutic. We're all stressed out about all the craziness in this country, different things you mentioned, and a lot of other things as well. Environment, certain of the politicians that are very frightening, and to listen to you and the mentality that you represent is very encouraging and therapeutic to listen to.
That's really sweet. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of folks who feel similarly to you, who are, and myself included, like everything is really twisted in a lot of scary ways, and it's we're involved in a way that bills and policies and things that are happening overnight that we're unaware of in terms of leadership and things like that. Just so much stuff is happening nonstop that we really have to be intentional about how we are, what we're taking in and what we're putting out. And that is why I choose to be really focused and intentional about how I utilize my energy and like who's in it. So who's in my life. So, but I think that the restorative philosophy has really been helpful in terms of how we can care for one another on the larger scale. You know, like we see that a lot of the systems that are in place not just don't work, but intentionally are made to be harmful to a lot of people. And so right now is a time when we can really use our noggins to be thinking about what it is, what else can we create? What else can we create? And can we create systems that have care at their root and dismantle any systems that are intentionally willing to harm? Mm-hmm. So, like, I just wanted to say again, thank you so much for sharing this time with everyone and being in community with us to talk about restorative practices, but it also gave me an opportunity to live in an embodied way. And that's very meaningful for me personally, but also grateful to everybody for just, you know, being curious about what else could be. So if anybody has any further questions, you know where to find me. And just again, thank you so much, Colonel, for creating this space tonight. And otherwise, we'll catch you on the flip side.
And Wendy, I can put your information in the chat from the slide if people want.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Andre. Oh, first of all, thank you, Andre, who was expert slide manager this evening for us. So thank you so much, Andre, for doing that for us.
Happy to help out. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, no doubt.
Excellent.
All right, y'all. Have a great night, and we will catch you on the flippy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're awesome. Wind, love you. Got it.
Keep it up,
Good night.
Win.
Thanks,
Bye, Win.
everyone.
Good night,
Keep the wind
everybody.
blowing.
Yeah, this was awesome. So supportive.
Really, really nice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's really good to see you.
Nice to see you too. There was an article in the press this morning, New York Times, about people becoming unchurched and becoming unmoored. Not the focus wasn't on just the religious piece of it, but that the church community provided a community. And people are becoming more and more unmoored.
Yeah.
And don't have the connection.
Yeah.
About how the indigenous community provides that community.
Yeah.
That for some people, the church is provided. So the question is, how are people going to find other ways to build community? That's part of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think colonization did a really big number on separating us from those original communities, right? So in colonization, the crux of colonization was really separating, like, you are good, you are bad. In indigenous communities, it was more like nobody gets thrown out. We all have to solve this together. And so, when colonization came along, it was like, you're going to heaven and you're going to hell, and very separate, and everybody's like climbing over each other to achieve something. And that's where we are today, how we got to where we are today. So
same people.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Uncle David, for showing up. It was really cool to see you.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. Talk to you soon. So let's see here. We got Move. Okay, cool. All right, and then there were 3. So yeah, Andre, just send me your Venmo or whatever it is, okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for doing this last minute. Like, I really, really appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate the presentation.
Thanks, man. Yeah,
Good stuff.
anytime. Thanks.
All right, have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Take good care.
Thanks, Andre. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Colonel, I did it. Oh my God.
That was awesome. That was awesome.
Stop recording.